This baby hits 88 miles per hour. You're gonna see some serious shit.
All right, what's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to episode 29 of the Take One podcast. Super excited for today's episode as I have a very special guest joining me tonight, Brandon Crane. What's going on, man? How you doing?
How's it going? No, good. Everything's good. How are you?
Yeah.
How are things with you?
Busy, but in a good way, and then trying to fight off some sickness because
Okay.
Virginia's weather just can't seem to get straight. Like for here, like it's 60 one day, 48 the other day, 31 the other day, and today it was 69. So
No, we've been
just,
we've been fighting rain over here, and we're just not used to it. So everybody's allergies are messed up. I'm sure a cold is in my immediate future.
well, let's hope not. But yeah, I know California is not used to all that rain.
No. Don't know what to do.
So
with
what's going on, man? How's everything been for you recently? I kind of, before we jump into, all of your past acting work and things of that nature, you started a podcast. So a fellow podcast right here before my eyes. Yeah. How'd that get started, man?
Again, looking for a creative outlet. I was just thinking about the release of Terrifier, actually. Terrifier 2, and I was just thinking, God, it'd be so cool to pin these guys down and do an interview that's a little bit different. And that was sort of where it was birthed. I was like, I talked to Damian Leone, and I was like, dude, I'm going to do a podcast, and I want you to be my first guest. And he said, yeah, no problem. We'll do it. I just thought it would be interesting to get, and it's kind of a dynamic you get with the Talk Scary to Me podcast that I think is cool. You're talking with your peers, so it's a little less formal. It's a little more, if you know, and the potential for inside jokes is amazing. So, I just thought it would be interesting to do a podcast that was more on the peer-to-peer level, where it's, it's informative, but it's also in freestyle and very casual, as opposed to having crazy check marks to check off, what I'm going to ask my guests. It's like, I already know.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that scandal at the hotel room, not with Damien. No, but I mean that kind of dynamic.
Well, you've had a hell of a guest list so far. You brought up Damien. You had David Howard Thornton on there as well.
I did. That was a funny interview.
Man, it was awesome. He's a great guy. I just had him on my last episode, and he's just so easy to talk to and a really down to earth person.
No, he really is. He really is. It's almost funny. You expect actors to not be who they are, in their roles. You expect them to be different. I mean, that's what makes acting so great. But someone like David Howard Thornton, who is, playing the craziest killer in the horror genre right now, just happens to be like the nicest guy you would borrow a lawnmower from, without question. And he's just like the coolest guy you'll ever meet.
Yeah, and again, so easy to talk to. And I know you said so. Terrifier 2 kind of sparked, your interest as far as doing the podcast. What did you think of the movie?
I absolutely loved it. I was very surprised, because I know they weren't working with Hollywood budgets, even though it was a hell of a lot more money, 5 times more money than they had the first go around.
Yeah.
You would never know it. I mean, it looked like something a studio would pull off. I mean, that's the level where Damien's managed to take the art. And when you give an artist a better set of tools, it's magical. And yeah, man, they went there. They really went there. I was very surprised. um, in that particular scene, if you know what I'm talking about. I mean, I'm sure we can get away with spoilers now, but I won't do it because I think there's still more box office money they can milk. So,
Oh, yeah,
but that
absolutely.
scene, man, was I mean, I know they did it during COVID, so they had all the time in the world to do it, and it shows. I can imagine the shot list going from, 7 or 8 shots to this this sort of movie within a movie very quickly because they were just, they had the time on their hands so they could experiment and explore and get this right and make a sequence that people are going to be talking about for generations. And that is that.
No, absolutely, and
Yeah.
they what I loved about it is they took, um all the elements from the first film with art, because I
Mhm.
felt like art that first film was nothing but art's film. Like that was his introduction, his movie. In this second film, they've done a tremendous job with, developing characters, storytelling. Lauren Lavera was awesome in this movie. So,
Oh, she's
you
great.
bring in those elements to this second film, keeping who art is, and it's just no reason it's hit $10 million on a $250,000 budget. It's
Yeah,
crazy. It's
I mean,
crazy.
you're always gonna need antagonists, right? And a lot of times, that genre, that slasher genre, you don't really have the developed stories, as you say. I mean, there's happenstance stuff. Most of these movies, all the shit happens on Halloween night, so you've got that built in, um, or you've just never really get a chance to care about the protagonist, and I found that incredibly refreshing with Terrifier 2. I cared about Lauren Lavera. I cared about, Elliot,
Yeah.
and I cared about, the other victims too. They weren't all completely superficial throwaway roles, um, in my opinion, and I think that's the future of this. I mean, it in many ways is, I'm not gonna say crude, but as for a movie that was shot with the budget that it had, it didn't just transcend the genre with the gore, right? I think I think it's a game changer on a lot of levels for the next, generation of slasher movies.
Yeah, I agree. And last comment on this is, I told David last episode, like I feel like I'm a huge horror fan, and being able I felt like this movie was a movie that we hadn't gotten in a really really long time.
Yeah.
Like I am somebody who loves horror from I'll see all the new stuff, all the old stuff, but I still lean back into that old style type of horror because I felt like one, it was just done on a different level than what
Yeah.
kind of what it is today. Maybe too much CGI today. And one of the things that stuck out to me was David said a lot of their stuff was practical, and you can tell.
Oh,
You can
yeah.
tell.
It's almost all practical, which is great. I think the only time they really used a miniature was the facade for the funhouse. There's a few things that they spend their money on. Um, a couple animatronics here and there, but by and large, dude, that movie was all practical, and that is part of the art as well. If you can elevate the practical effects to that level, um, again, another another notch.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So I kind of want to dive into obviously your career and kind of what got you started in your acting career. I know you started super young, I believe, with a
Yeah,
peanut butter commercial, if I'm not
yeah,
mistaken.
yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, Annette Funicello was my first TV mom. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, it's funny. My grandfather was an actor. He was a radio broadcaster for like 40 years in LA, but he was in Gone with the Wind. So there was a party that I'm pretty sure was Gone with the Wind centric, around like early 1980. So I was three and a half. No, I was four. Yeah, I was four. And I was at this party, and there was a lady who was there, and I think it was Tony Mannix, who was George Reeves's lover, if you will. George Reeves, the original Superman.
Yep.
He was one of the twins with my grandfather in the beginning of Gone with the Wind. So they were friends. They went to school at Pasadena Playhouse. I mean, they were friends for a very long time, up until his death. And so he remained friends with her. I think she's the one who got me going. Hooked me up with an agent. I went out on an audition and I got it, and it was for Skippy. And it was crazy too because we lived near San Diego. So, back then you could get to LA in an hour, hour and a half without traffic. So that was my after school sport. Like that was my after school activity. Um, but it would prove to be pretty fun, and I was getting a lot of work. So I remember as time went on and the work started coming in more and more and more, we started moving closer and closer to LA instead of having to drive up there and back, 5 times a week and do homework and all of the
Yeah.
responsibilities that we had. I mean, she owned her own business, so that gave her some freedom um that she wouldn't have otherwise had. But really, we just did this when it was convenient for her, and it just worked out. Totally worked out.
So I know you're, growing up as a young actor, your mom had to be heavily involved with you, and obviously signing off uh, on this work. How big of an
Mhm.
influence and support system was she, um, you know, for your acting career?
But she was a great support. I mean, she was totally on board as long as it worked for us, as long as it didn't interfere with her business, as long as I wasn't being exploited, and as long as she didn't have to spend any time with the other stage moms. Um, she fucking hated them, and I don't blame her because like when you're auditioning for something, I mean, we call them interviews, right? When you're at an interview, it's the same as when you're interviewing for another job. You're in a waiting room, a holding tank with other applicants, right?
Mhm.
And you can imagine the game face stuff that's happening there, right? The moms, there's kind of a social thing, so the moms talk, but when they're talking, they're not supportive of one another. They're trying to suss everything out. They're trying to
Yeah.
feel like who's getting what work and who's doing what, and they're quick to kind of play that face game with the other kids too. And it's just fucked up, right? So so my mom would actually, she couldn't do this now, but she would drop me off because these were all places that we would go to on a repeated basis. Like I
Yeah.
go to a place called Baker Nisbet, across the street from Norm's on La Cienega in LA 4 times a week. There were these set places where these auditions were happening. So I knew where I was going, and my mom was more than happy to just wait in the car, and I would sign myself in and I would sign myself out and I would read the script and I would do my business and I would go. End of story. She didn't want anything to do with that, with those politics, didn't want
Yeah.
anything to do with
The
with the
shadiness.
moms. Yeah, that and the moms that were living vicariously through their kids. It's just it's just kind of gross. Like I said, we could do
Yeah.
this when it worked for her. She didn't drop everything so I could, to live on Easy Street. It's hard living. So, she was definitely a grounding force, and she kept that perspective pretty pretty open for me.
Now, have you lived in California your entire life?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, since the beginning. So, yeah, when I was about 8, we moved from San Diego area to Orange County and just moved closer and closer. Um, and now I've passed it. I live in the middle of California by Yosemite now. Um,
Okay.
which is great because now I'm not really pursuing the work anymore. I mean, not really. I'm not at all. Um, but now things have kind of evolved, and I'm 6 miles away from an airport that can get me anywhere in the world. So it actually works out kind of nice for things like conventions and cameos
Yeah.
and fun stuff like that. But yeah, no, California, born and raised, and you know, I don't know if I'd want to live anywhere else.
It's a good state. I've visited a few times, and of course, the what stuck out to me easily was the weather. I went there mid December. I think I went to LA my first time, and it was just like stepping out of the airport. I'm like, this is amazing. Like no
Yeah.
humidity. It's just
Mm-mm.
not a cloud in the sky. Gorgeous.
Yeah.
Like it was like I was like totally somewhere different. And of course, I was obviously on the other side of the United States, but it was just like a whole different world over there.
Well, you get
It's
actual
crazy.
seasons in Virginia, which is awesome. I mean,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
were the losers, most of the losers, original losers. We went to a Comic-Con in Bangor, Maine, last month, and it was just as things were kind of turning to fall. And it was my first time on the East Coast, outside of an airport, you know. So
Yeah.
it was an amazing experience, and I mean, I loved it. But of course, I came back um, to where I live, and it was still in the 90s. You know, God. And
Yeah.
where I live specifically, it can get up to 115, 116 degrees up
Oh,
until
man.
the first week of October. I mean, it's just it can be bad, right? But like right now, our forecast, it's wet right now, but our forecast moving forward and probably through the rest of the winter, we're gonna have lows in the 30s, highs in the 60s.
Yeah.
Not too bad. Not too bad. Predictable.
Yeah, see, that's just the only
Mm.
thing I dislike about Virginia. We do get the seasons, but like in
Yeah.
January, we can get like 75-degree weather. It's so weird. It's been
Yeah.
all over the place the past few years, but
Yeah.
I enjoy it. But I just remember going over there and stepping out with the no humidity, and
Oh
it
yeah.
just felt great. It was just a
Oh yeah.
different experience. So when you went to Maine,
Mhm.
I know you went for the convention. Were you able to do any sightseeing while you were up there, or
Oh yeah,
um,
absolutely. It was great. In fact, the convention set us up with this group called SK Tours. And SK Tours is awesome. They are longtime friends of Stephen King. Their families go way back. The guy who's running the show right now, Jamie, his dad used to run a bookstore that Stephen King would frequent. So they're
okay,
pretty well interwoven into the Stephen King lore as active participants, you know. So um which is great. So you can get some like real insight. You know, these are there's like trivia and there's landmarks and there's all kinds of things to see, but the information comes from Stephen King himself. So this was my, you know, you'll find out that this was his inspiration for this. You know, we drove by the place where Night Shift was filmed. We went to the cemetery where, you know, from where like Gage was buried in, you know, Pet Cemetery. We found the grave markers that, um, you know, inspired like Georgie and Carrie White. And I think the grave
mm,
marker was Carrie Black. And as Bart Mixon said, you know, very creative, Stephen. But
yeah, I would eat that up.
oh
I
yeah,
would
no,
eat that up.
it was great. And sadly, you know, because a total I'm not familiar with his entire canon, right? So you know, some
Granted,
of
it's a
the
lot.
yeah,
It's a
it's a
lot.
lot. It's a lot. And so, you know, a lot of it was kind of lost on me. But that I mean, it's all good. It is intriguing enough to make me want to read some of these titles. But everything that I found like supremely noteworthy from that tour is all within like a few block radius from his house. So the sewer drain where, you know, Georgie loses his arm, all of that stuff is within walking distance. I mean, you could imagine him walking dogs, um, you know, Molly, the thing of evil,
Mhm.
and stumbling upon something else that he can draw into to his books. It's a pretty amazing place, and I can see how easy it is for him to draw that inspiration.
Yeah, I've always wanted to visit up there for that reason, and I hope one
Dude, you
day
have
too.
to. You
I
have
know, I hear it. I hear it all the time. I know it's an experience. How was the house? How was seeing the house in person? Because I feel like you always see it like on online and people taking pictures outside of it, but
Oh, yeah.
it just man, it had to be gorgeous in person
It's yeah,
and
I mean,
creepy.
it's bigger than it seems. You know, it looks like a little Victorian house from the front, but if you ever Google Earth that property, you'll know that the add-ons to that go back, are pretty amazing. Like it looks to me, it looks like they built a city, behind it. But you can't tell by looking at the front. But it is definitely an imposing house. Um, and it's like a mecca. It's a bucket list kind of thing. I mean, it's the place where a lot of that art has come from. And you don't have to be the most avid Stephen King reader to
Yeah.
not be moved by it. I think, there's people that propose in front of that spot. And it's great. And I think it's amazing that he doesn't try and chase people away. I mean, he's only there a couple weeks out of the year, and Marlon was threatening to like jump over the fence just to get his attention. Like we knew that he was there. So it would have been super special if
So
we'd
he
gotten a chance to meet him, but we never have.
so he was there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I
And like I
found
said,
it
he's only there a little bit out of the year, and we just
so
happened to
what
be there when he was.
I was about to say, what are the odds of that? Um,
Mhm.
I found it so weird that y'all have not met him yet.
No, no. But there's a couple things I think at play with that. Number one, there was a very long period of time where he felt like he was the kiss of death. So if he had a cameo role or he was too involved in the projects, he felt like it was the kiss of death. So that explains, part of that. And number two, I think the fact that there may have been some distance. It's speculative, of course, but I mean there may have been a little bit of distance put between him because his favorite adapter, Larry Cohen, only wrote the first half.
Yeah.
So it was finished by Tommy Lee Wallace, who is a good writer. I mean, he's a fine writer. He'll say he's competent, but he's fine. I think he did a great job with what he had to do.
Man,
So
yeah,
there's a
I
couple,
would say
of
so.
things. I imagine he might, and lastly, because it's for television, it was the first big TV thing for him, and I think maybe it was kind of like, let's just keep our distance.
Yeah, I
And
understand that. And then especially here lately, I don't see him doing a lot of interviews or anything like that. I feel like he's always somebody who is kind of off in the distance. Like sometimes he'll pop out for a book. I know one of his recent ones, he did go on a late night talk show to do that. But, compared to other celebrities, I feel like you don't see him as much as you do compared to other people. And, rightfully so.
well, I mean, he has everything he needs. I think he's a very simple person, right? His needs are simple. He came up from enormous poverty. Um, he's very private, and he's not a city creep. I mean, I'm a city creep. I love the city, but everything he wants, he has where he is. Um, so I mean, I think he'll only pop out if he feels like certain things are getting out of hand politically, or he'll like you say, like he's doing a presser for a book. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, I know you. I know you brought up Marlon. Fun fact: I actually just found this out recently, which is kind of crazy to me. Tim Reed is actually from Virginia or lives in Virginia,
He
which I
lives in
did.
Virginia.
I,
Yeah.
I didn't. I didn't know that until I actually spoke with John on the podcast. I know he grew up in Norfolk, I believe, somewhere in that area. And I didn't know that he had come back and he's living here now. But I found that so fascinating because we don't have a lot of people from here outside of a couple athletes. So I found that
Well,
really interesting.
I think you're going to find now that we've figured out, like big tech, they've figured out how you can work from home, right, and still be productive and still contribute.
Yeah.
Um, we've kind of found the same thing out with acting too, and with self taping, you know, you can submit yourself for anything from anywhere. Um, so you've got people that live wherever they want to live. I mean, like Bruce
So
Campbell, he lives in Oregon.
yeah.
People live everywhere.
So
You know,
with that these days is self taping happening way more than it did before. I would assume with all the technology going on.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there are seminars now. The Screen Actors Guild is doing seminars and giving you like all the information that you need, what casting directors are looking for, technically speaking. They don't want you to to film like a color graded, mini epic, but they do have some specific criteria, and it's not a whole lot. I mean, I could swap out my kid's bedroom wall and put like a blue screen back there and submit myself for whatever I want. And if they like you, they'll fly you out. That's it.
That's
Jeremy Ray
crazy
Taylor.
though. I feel like it's good.
Case in point, Jeremy Ray Taylor, young Ben in the new films. And lots of other things now. He still lives in Tennessee. He can do it from there. He's close enough to, an airport to get him wherever he's got to go, and he can do it. So I think you're going to find more and more people making inroads into the business who might live right down the street from you, and you'll never know it.
I know. It's so crazy. I love it though. I love little stuff like that. So all right, I kind of want to dive into Stephen King's It, obviously.
Never heard of it.
I have to say, I have to let you know, I've interviewed some people before, and I have to say this is probably my favorite interview so far. I am a big fan of your work, and I am a big fan of this movie. It is the first horror movie that I ever saw as a kid. It's still one of those movies that creep me out. I think a lot of that has to do with nostalgia and it being the first one that I ever saw. But how did you get cast in this film?
It is definitely a gateway horror movie, isn't it? Yeah.
It's crazy, and of course, I tell this every time. It was my uncle. My uncle is, because my parents wouldn't let me watch horror movies, but my uncle was the one. Anytime I would go over to his house, he would pop in, of course, the old classics, and still to this day, my top three are Halloween, It, and The Shining, which are all old school movies that I kind of grew up with first watching. So, yeah, absolutely.
You figure if it's good enough to be on TV, right? It's okay to show your kids. Honestly, that's the way I look at it. And like Tim Curry in the documentary, he goes, if you're traumatized, maybe you shouldn't have been watching it. But it really was, meant for TV. But that's awesome. I'm glad that I could be a part of your journey into the genre. That's cool.
Yeah.
I'd started doing like television work outside of commercials, probably like starting at 8, right? And as I got into my teens, I was gaining weight. I was the heavy kid, so there was a lot of work for me doing like throwaway stuff, fat gags, pratfalls, being the fifth wheel on a wagon, an expendable friend. That was the extent of my experience. There's plenty of work for me to do that, and I didn't really care. I mean, it didn't cause me any grief. It was my niche, and I laughed all the way to the bank. Right? It's all good. My therapy not necessary. So when I was 14 and a half, maybe, I had a kid who lived a couple houses down from me who was a little older, so he was into all the cool shit, right? He got me a copy of the Satanic Verses when there was all that controversy and everybody put a jihad on Salman Rushdie. Things that were poignant and controversial, that dude would get into my hands, right? So great music, Anthrax, and literature too. But there's the scene in the book that is almost like porn, right? So he's like, dude, you got to read this. And I read it. But there was something about Ben Hanscom, the character, that kind of spoke to me a little bit. So I started from the beginning. I wanted to see how we got there, right? How did we get there?
How old were you when this?
So 14 and a half. So yeah, it was 89. So winter 1989. And I was already doing Wonder Years and all that was good. So I felt I had some clout, and I told my agent, I connect with this role. I've got to do it. If they ever make this a movie and it's not too late and I'm not too old, I've got to get in the ring for this. Because on every level, I was transient because I moved so much. Always the new kid in school. I was fat. I was always in the friend zone, and I was always bullied, right? So, not always, but man, people find the weirdest shit to bully you for. Um,
That's true. I mean,
yeah.
especially, I mean, just any and everything.
Oh yeah. No,
You
no, no.
get
It
it.
was
You
really
get it.
funny.
You get an A on your test. Fucking smart kid showing off. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
it
Yeah, yeah.
just
No.
everything.
I'm walking down the hallways of school, and because I'm on the Wonder Years, some kids like, "Hey, Wonder Years," and in my mind, I'm like, "Yeah." And that's another thing too. I was never like separated. I never completed years of schooling like most regulars on TV series do.
Yeah.
I was like, I'd be gone for a few days or a week, and I'm back, for 3 weeks or 4 weeks. So I was, part time at this, and 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 in the trenches with everyone else in general population, uh,
Mhm.
for the rest of the month. So anyway, um, yeah. So I connected with the character. I gave it a shot. It was probably April, maybe, or March or April, and they were auditioning, and I walked out of that audition, and it was the scene. They had me read the scene, sitting down in front of Jim Green's desk, in his office, and I'm reading the scene where Ben and Eddie meet each other for the first time, and we're talking about how our dads are gone. Um, and I read that, and I felt so good about it. And just because I'm kind of nervous, and I've never really auditioned very well. It was one of the first times that I felt really good about the audition. Um, and but I didn't hear anything for a while. And I think a couple weeks came back, and I'd already thought I didn't get the role. So I was a little disappointed because I thought it was my chance to do something different. Um, so we get a phone call that there's callbacks. I was like, "Oh my god, awesome." Went in there. As far as I'm concerned, I nailed the callback. I'm like, "Okay, this is good." Couple weeks go by. Again, didn't think I got it. They did not give my agent any feedback, which is disappointing. Because how are you going to get better if you don't know what you did or didn't do? And a lot of times in that business, it has nothing to do with you anyway. But it's always nice to
Yeah.
get some kind of constructive criticism. I mean, you could have read the shit out of it the way it was intended to be written, and you did things that the director's like, wow. But at the end of the day, you don't get it just because it they see a different look, or there's something,
Mhm.
it has
So
nothing to
even
do with
even
you.
the smallest of things, like you said.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Nothing to do with you. So you can't really take these things personally. Um, but this was my shot to do something different. And then a couple weeks go by, and I get a phone call to show up on a Saturday, which is odd. It's kind of rare. But they were doing a chemistry read where they brought a whole bunch of us in, and they were swapping us out and having us read different lines just to see how the different groups of kids got on with each other. And for something that's an ensemble project like it is, the chemistry is everything. You have to have that chemistry. So they were very deliberate about the kids, being cast. And when I was in there, I didn't remember seeing any other fat kids. And there was no way Ben couldn't be fat in this thing. So I was like, dude, I think the session runner,
Mhm.
who is the guy who, grabs you and brings you in, and sort of organizes the auditions, manages the people. I said, dude, where are the other Bens? And he goes, I think there are a couple kids in Vancouver, and I think there's one in Texas. Um, but I think it's you. You never hear that from anyone ever.
Yeah.
And again, 2 weeks go by. I thought, that guy was full of shit. Serves me right. You should never ask that question in the first place. Um, that's what I get. Another lesson learned. And then I got the call saying, "Hey, what are you doing in 2 weeks?" And that was that.
I love that. I love that. I know that was. I feel like that process is just a whole long process, and obviously the frustrating part is not hearing anything back for weeks at a time. Like that's
Yeah, I
got to be the
mean,
most frustrating part.
absolutely. And there are times when, someone wants to use you, but they're not sure. But at the same time, they don't want you to run off and book something else. So, they give you a holding fee. Like they pay you to not take other work while they decide if you're going to do the job or not. And at that time, it is precisely when all of the fucking summer movies are being cast for TV and movies of the week and things like that. I was not a feature film actor. I mean, really, apart from a tiny cameo in Sister Act 2, um, being on set for It Chapter 2 was like the first time I was ever actively like in a role in a feature film, right? That was going to be played in theaters. So, bucket list item checked off there. Um, Anybody know a good skydiving school? Um, so yeah, so I mean, that was it was kind of crucial
Yeah.
to know if I got it or not, so I could, you know, even consider wasting someone else's time for a movie of the week or something like that. Anyway, but I'm
So
glad
we
it
just
worked out.
so we just kind of holding off banking on this. Is that kind of how you went about it, as far as not
No,
applying to anything else? No,
no, I wasn't banking on it at all. In fact, quite the opposite. I was going after other things.
as you should though, as you should.
Yeah, I mean, as you should. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I worked enough that I wasn't used to not working for more than a month. There was always something, a commercial or a five-liner on Mr. Belvedere or something, just something like that. There was always that kind of work. Um, so I figured, that's my lot. Like that's my niche, and maybe these aspirations of doing something more meaningful are ridiculous and not for me. But thank God I got cast. Right?
I mean, yeah, I mean, I felt like all of the kids in that movie really connected with one another, and it really
Oh yeah.
showed on screen. I mean, it's just so how was that working on set with them? Because I think one of the biggest things that I really love and connect with this movie, and I just actually watched it recently, is just the camaraderie that the Losers Club has in this
Mhm.
movie. Like, it reminds me of me and my friends as a kid outside riding bikes, playing at creeks, playing in the
Oh yeah.
woods, like, just really connected with that. So, like, that really sticks out to me even to this day when I watch it. It takes me back to a time, again, like when I was outside playing with my friends till the street lights came on. And I thought that
Mhm.
that was one of the things about this movie, although a horror film, that Stephen King, the way he wrote it, in the book, and even what played out on screen, just
Yeah.
really, like, it was so nice to have a mixture of, like, positive, and then you go into the evil, positive, and then go into the evil. Like,
Yeah.
that scene, one of my favorite scenes of the movie, or of the series, I should say, is when y'all are down at the creek and y'all are playing at the creek building the dam. Like, that
Mhm.
is just such a great scene, great song, and
Yeah.
it's so well done.
They let us pretty loose too. I mean, they just said, "Hey, improvise. You're gonna have fun. There's no lines or anything. Just have fun.
Yeah.
Build a dam, please, now." And so, so we did, and it was great. We had fun. Hey, Brandon, and he's got like a megaphone or something, and he's like kind of telling us what to do. And he's like, Brandon, why don't you
Yeah.
fall down? Well, yeah, I can do that. I've done that shit before. That's fine. I'll do that. I'll fall
Yeah,
down. Um,
absolutely.
yeah, no, I mean, it was great working with them. The chemistry was great. Tommy Lee Wallace will say it in the documentary. Two things about us kids. Number one, lightning in a bottle, because our chemistry was amazing. Uh,
Yes, yep.
and number two, that chemistry also like ground down the production team's nerves, because at the end of the day, we were still just kids.
Yeah, of
Uh,
course.
and they worked us pretty hard, um, because we started shooting with an air date already. It's not like a film where you can put it in the can and you've got an idea where it's going to release or when it's going to release, or we can hold on to that. Um, they had already had a date that it's going to air. So the pressure's on. I mean, you shoot fast and you shoot hard. And if you're doing something with this much, shooting, this much film, something this long, like you don't have time to fuck around.
Yeah.
So there was a time that Jim Green came down and we had like a come to Jesus meeting where he's like, hey, so you guys are at work and do you like what you do? And we're like, yeah, that's great. He's like, great. So stop screwing around if you ever want to do it again. Okay.
Oh.
Have a nice day. We're like, okay, point taken. We understand. So that, yeah, I mean, we were kind of always in and out of trouble that way. Like there's a really funny scene when Officer Nell comes down. This guy, Patrick Kelly, he very serious actor, very, very good fine actor, right? Probably went to RADA or Guildford or one of the big British acting schools. And it showed. But instead of, for his close-up, when he's talking to us, instead of them putting tape on the matte box, for eye lines, they literally had all of us behind the camera so he could interact with us individually. May not have been necessary, but one of us had some joke. One of us said something, and we ended up developing one of those church laughs. And this dude lost his shit, honestly. So, I mean, I think that interaction might have been the catalyst for Jim Green to kind of have a come to Jesus meeting with us, but we wouldn't have happened if we weren't so close, if we didn't have fun, genuine fun, just being with one another. So, yeah. I mean, it's the summer of a lifetime, and it's definitely thanks to these awesome people.
Yeah, absolutely. And the documentary, which I'm going to jump into in a little bit, was phenomenal, and I just so well done. And it's something that I've been waiting for, is just somebody to dive into that movie, and I'm glad that they did do that. But it was so cool to see the behind the scenes, like photos and videos of just like y'all as kids being kids and just like hugging each other and playing around, and it was so cool to see. So cool to see.
They gave us that opportunity too. It wasn't like we were at some prison camp. We had time to ourselves. But all things considered, we had to shoot hard and shoot fast. I mean, the first thing I shot, I was with the kids when I climbed down the ladder and I pick up the pom-pom. That was the first thing I ever shot for that film. And I was terrified. Not because of the spooky environment or because I'm some awesome actor. I was so terrified that I was going to suck. So, yeah, I mean, but they created an environment where that wasn't going to be possible. Tommy Lee Wallace is a great director. He knows how to get things out of you. And I learned so much from that. And with the friendships with the other kids, I learned a lot from them too, especially Jonathan. He was open, and we had fun, and we kind of looked to him as a leader because he'd done features and he's kind of hot shit at the time. So, but he was a good kid, and yeah, definitely looked to him as sort of a default leader.
Yeah, and definitely rightfully so. I mean, he was phenomenal. I mean, all of y'all were, and it showed on camera. I can't step away from this without talking about Tim Curry. Just the guy that he is, the actor that he is. I've heard nothing but great things about him too. I've never heard anybody say anything negative about him. How was your first interaction with him, and then really just working with him throughout this film?
Well, my first interaction was when Ben sees his dad on the lake, and the dad slowly morphs into Pennywise.
Yeah.
But he had already shot his bit. So we're walking through the Barrens I'm walking with one of the ADs, and we were kind of like passing ships. And I was so nervous to meet him because I knew who he was. Wise Guy was my favorite show at the time. Hunt for Red October just come out. Like, it's Tim Curry, right? Yeah, we all know who Tim Curry is. So it was one of those close to greatness moments, for a budding young actor. And we were just passing ships, and I was so nervous. And she stopped Tim and said, "Tim, this is Brandon Crane, and he would really love to meet you." And he's like, "Well, here I am. Break a leg."
I love that.
And I was like, "It's like that? Okay, cool. Thank you. Nice to meet you, sir." And then we go on and we do our thing. So we never really got to do that together. And I never really saw him again until we were shooting the confrontation in the sewer,
Oh
when
yeah.
he's with us and we're actually fighting him. That was really the only two times that I had any interaction with Tim Curry whatsoever. And that was a freaking masterclass. Watching that guy just be Tim during rehearsals. And then the minute Tommy would yell action, there's some nuclear switch that gets flipped. And
hmm
people like that make you a better actor, because there's that whole give and take. You have to have a certain output of energy, right, in order to affect it, the person you're opposite. It's just like real life. I mean, you want something and you have this energy that you're going to use to get it. And someone like that, someone that electric, makes you a better actor as long as you're paying attention, just by being near it. Because we couldn't help, in spite of all the people around us and the people fucking with our clothes and our making sure the drops of glycerin that look like sweat are in the same place every time.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, it's really easy to get pulled out of it. Um, and working with someone like Tim draws you right back in. So that was an incredible experience for me. And I saw him about 10 or 11 years later.
I was
I was
gonna ask
actually,
you, have you seen him since then?
yeah, yeah. So 10 or 11 years later, it's funny. I was doing a musical in LA, and so I was working as a courier during the day, and I got this page to go pick up some mail in a mailbox and take it to an accountant firm, right? And it has the typical information. It says Tim Curry, and it says, "Please do not disturb the occupant." And I was like, "Tim Curry? Get out of town. Can't be the same Tim Curry. It's ridiculous." I drive up, I get to his house. Sure as shit, it's Tim Curry's house. And
Damn.
so I'm like, I get the mail, and I was like, I turn around and I start walking towards my car, and I'm like, fuck this. I'm not just
Yeah.
like some schmuck, man. I worked with this dude and I want to say hi. So I did. I rang the doorbell. Marsha opens the door, and we had this kind of hey moment. And amazingly, she recognized me and she's like, "Tim." And so Tim came out and we talked, and
Oh.
yeah, it was great. He was just about to do Spam-A-Lot on Broadway, and we had sort of this thing in common because David Hyde Pierce and I had the same voice teacher in LA, Calvin Remsburg, and his slot was the slot before mine. So I'd always show up early so I could kind of get a sneak peek of this new Spam-A-Lot musical, the Monty Python musical, because I've always been a huge fan of Monty Python too. So we were talking about that, and then I realized what time it was, and I had to go, and I haven't seen him since. But I know some of the other losers have run into him at conventions. In fact, I was at Monster Palooza in June, and Tim Curry was there as well, but he wasn't even in the same building as we were. He was
Oh wow.
in the auditorium, yeah, and they had this whole thing kitted out because he only does photo ops. Anything he signs, he does in his home. It's private signing, you mail it in, etc. And then he had a bunch of like pre-signed things that, you know, were there.
Yeah.
But I mean, the line to see Tim Curry was bigger than the line for the event. So there was no getting in there to even talk to him. And I, you know, without the right circumstances either, I don't think it's necessarily fair to like try and rush in and say hey and expect him to remember me. And I mean, just given his condition, I felt it would not be
Yeah.
uh, a positive experience for him, right? So why do it?
I definitely understand that. Well, it's good that you had that experience and good
Yeah.
positive experiences with him, and
Oh man, he
just
was
that
amazing.
story. That story 10 to 11 years later, like, what are the odds of that happening? Like,
Oh,
that's a
oh,
story in
absolutely.
itself.
Absolutely. I mean, I'd hope the next time that I saw Tim Curry, we'd be working together again, right? Instead of me picking up his fucking mail, right?
Yeah.
But that's just the way the cookie crumbles, right? Those are the breaks, and
It's
it's
a hell of
fun.
a story. It's a hell of a story.
It's okay. At least it's still positive, you know. I mean, it was
That
it was
that is
cool.
true.
Totally
That
cool.
is true. So, obviously, Tim Curry was a big name on the film,
Mhm.
as well. Obviously, facing Pennywise being I feel like I do wanna say this, though, and get your opinion on this.
Be careful.
He eh
No, I'm just kidding.
I enjoyed the new remakes. I did. I was kinda nervous about the remakes, but I thought Bill Skarsgård did absolutely phenomenal in his role as Pennywise. But
I agree.
there's still something about Tim Curry's It that just is on another level to me as far as just not only Pennywise, but horror icons. And, like, I don't know if it's just the simplicity of, himself as the clown, or what it is, but he still stands out on another level. It's so crazy when I sit back and think about it.
I don't think either of them are simple. I mean, I think Tim Curry's Pennywise is very layered. It's not as dark as
Yeah,
Bill Skarsgård's for sure. So
I guess that's the right word. Not simple because there is layers. So I would say as far as darkness and when it comes to Tim Curry's, it's just like a clown you would see at the fair, and
yeah, yeah,
Skarsgård is something that you would see in your nightmares.
yeah. I mean, his vaudevillian humor, I mean, is great. Do you have Prince Albert? You
Oh yeah,
can. You better let him out. He's got the noisemaker, and he's a
and the
ham.
way he laughs too.
Absolutely, totally vaudevillian. But he knows that, you know, in order to attract the children, that's the form he needs to take, initially at least, right? There's
Yep.
something seductive. And I think the whole tone of the movie, and I think the best example of his Pennywise is in the very beginning when that little girl, Lorianne, is on her tricycle and she sees him for the first time behind the billowing cloud, not clouds, the sheets, right?
Mhm.
And he looks happy and charming and he's playful. Um, and you can see her head kind of cock, and it's intriguing, right? It's seductive. The curtain blows again, and you see this completely different face. You see the intensity with which he's about to eat. You
Mhm.
know, the entire tone changes, and that one look to me, I think, is the most sinister aspect of the whole film. And that encapsulates that Pennywise. I mean, that's the dynamic.
Yeah,
It goes from here to here. Um,
absolutely. And you
and my
explained the
only
best the different layers that he has.
But I think my only criticism about Bill Skarsgård, I loved his Pennywise. I think he was ferocious and exciting, and he's a pleasure to watch
Mhm.
because his process is completely different and his interpretation is completely different. It's
Yeah.
infinitely more, not infinitely more sinister, but it is more sinister on the outside. And so my criticism is just that there's nothing seductive about that version of the clown
I would
that would
agree, yeah.
lure kids like Pennywise. If I was Eddie Kasprak and I see that shit for the first time, I would be gone. I would have left
Absolutely.
the city and I would have come back with a horde of people and burnt that house down. Like, there's nothing seductive about that particular Pennywise in that form, in that state. That's my only beef, but that's only really because I'm biased because
Mhm.
I've grown up with mine. um, and I just see it a little differently. That's all. But apart from that, I loved every minute of both of those movies. I really did.
Yeah. Yeah, and they did such a good job because, again, as somebody who enjoyed the original, you get you get kind of nervous when somebody tries to remake a movie or touch
Yeah.
a horror classic. So for them to be able to pull off what they did, I thought was absolutely phenomenal. And obviously you had that cameo in chapter 2.
Yeah.
How was that for you? I
That
mean,
was
that
great.
had to go step back into that world had to be phenomenal for you. How
It
did
was
that
great.
happen?
It was great. It was a long time in the making. Let's put it that way. Um, but before I answer, I will say this about the It remake in general, is they've been
Mhm.
threatening to do this for 15 years, if not
God, I
longer,
know. Yeah.
right? Once they figured out that they could probably get away with doing this in 2 parts, um, it's been a thing, and people have come and gone. The project's shifted hands, I don't know how many times, maybe 3 times, 4 times. So every time I hear another person is attempting to remake this movie, um, the more skeptical I would become. Right? There's no way if they were going to do it, they would have done it already. And it was really before Warner Brothers. No disrespect, Warner Brothers, but I mean honestly, for a while there, scraping the barrel with the remakes. Like, do we have an
Yeah.
original idea? Um, but I think this is an incredible exception because it's not a remake as much as it is a reimagining, a retelling. So, um, like you say, I was nervous. The trailer for it dropped, it broke the internet, and I was floored. I was like, holy shit, this is going to be amazing. I can't wait to see what they do with this. So, for whatever reason, I'd been following Barbara and Andy and on Instagram and Twitter or whatever, but I was on Facebook when I watched the trailer. So I just messaged Andy on Facebook and I was like, dude, you don't know who I am, whatever. For what it's worth, I'm excited for you. This trailer was amazing. I can't wait to see the final product. Best of luck, Brandon Crane, you know, apostrophe 90, right? Like class of 1990, whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and he reached back almost instantly. He was like, "Hey, it's you. Oh, I loved you in the miniseries, blah, blah, blah." So we just started talking, and it was, it's pretty cool, to be able to talk about this. I mean, he didn't give me any spoilers or anything, but we kind of talked about the process and it's very casual. I go to see it opening night and I come home reeling from this amazing experience. I When I sat down in the seat and the feature started, I felt like I was blindfolded on a roller coaster. There's no turning back. You hope to God that it doesn't kill you, right? Um, and I was nervous. I was nervous for Jeremy Ray Taylor. I was nervous. I was nervous. Um, and I walked out of there just floored. It was amazing. So I jumped on Facebook again. I was like, Andy, this was amazing. Um, Congratulations. Can't wait to see what you do next. Right. Um, and he said, "Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's been quite a ride. And I know that people have been watching the mini series to prepare themselves." And I said, "Yeah, that's amazing because we're talking about 2 different universes altogether."
Oh yeah.
And then out of the blue, he goes, "You should do a cameo." What? What do you what? I'm on Facebook. That's mental. That's not how this works. And then I realized, you know what, dude, this account is not verified.
Oh no.
And I was like, oh, holy shit. So for months I've been talking to Andy Muschietti, thinking, oh man, this isn't real, right? So
Mhm.
I put my head in my hands and I pop over to Instagram with one eye and I start writing. Okay. Feeling pretty stupid right now, but hey, am I getting trolled over here on Facebook? And I sent him a screenshot of the conversation and nothing. Left me on red, even, or seen on Instagram. But at least it was verified there, so I know it was Andy Muschietti. And then he claps back a little later and he's like, ha 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 ha, I'm the troll. And I'm think my monologue is thank fuck for that. Right. God only knows what I would have done if I'd been played. I'm sure
Yeah.
worse things have happened on the internet. So that's pretty much how that played out. And we talked a little bit about how it's going to play out. Is it are we going to go the Ricky Lee route, like we do in the book, or would I work for Bev? Would it just be some fun piece of trivia? That's all it was ever really intended to be. So that was what, September. In April, they asked New Line. New Line was doing backflips over the idea. They thought it was cool, super cool, but provided, well, can he still do the work? So they wanted me to self tape, an audition, and basically read, the monologue, as the big guy in the office. So I did, and got the right feedback. I ran it by Andy first, got the feedback, submitted it to Rich Delia. They gave it to New Line. New Line goes, yes, do it. And I had to keep it a secret from like April. Well, I mean, I had to keep it a secret from the beginning anyway.
Yeah.
So that was what, September of 2017. I was on set in October of 2018. So
Oh wow.
kept that a secret. And then, so that was up in Toronto. And then I couldn't say a word to anybody until the movie came out the following September. So, I mean, it was a couple years in the making. And my only regret about all of that is, number one, they had to move the story along, right? But there's some really
Yeah.
funny business in that scene originally, because he totally chokes on this presentation like Jeremy Ray Taylor choked talking to Bev in the first movie. So it's kind of it's like a real elaborate fake out. Because then they cut to Jay Ryan, the shovelhead, even featured, hot dude as
Mhm.
Ben. That's like one regret. The second regret is that I'd been doing conventions in between. So from like the moment I got back from Toronto until the movie came out, I'm literally face to face with fans of the movies, and they're asking me, are you any of you guys doing cameos in like It Chapter 2? And I had to look them in the eye and fucking lie to their face, you know,
Yeah, of
and say
course.
no.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I could have like winked or something like that, but I was not about to do anything of the sort,
Oh yeah,
because
absolutely.
this is big business, dude. Like, big business. You don't mess with big business. I think
Not
it
at
was like a
all. And
$75 million budget, big business. Like, don't. Mm-mm.
then when they're going into the movie, I mean, they would when you came on, I was like, oh my god, no way. I was like, and you don't want to take that from the fans to begin with,
No,
anyways, because
not at all.
that shock factor it was good. It was good.
Yeah.
They did a really good job with that.
I mean, like, so Warner Brothers, they had the premiere and all that, and they were so gracious. Like, New Line was gracious. They invited me to the premiere, the red carpet, and all that. And in my 40 some odd years in the business, I'd never done a red carpet before, right? So, um, it just so happened that I arrived, um, on my own as a pleb, just as Jeremy Ray Taylor was showing up in his limo. So Jeremy's first, and then I follow him, and we had a
Mhm.
moment to take some photos together. Great shots, right? But I was like a pig in shit. I was so happy to be there. So as we go into the press tent, however, right, because everyone who's in that line, anyone who's on that list, it's kind of expected that you'll do the photo lineup. You got 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces, so you get your pictures. And in my case, just to prove to all my homies that I was actually there, right? Um, and then you go into the press tent. And the press tent, there's all these people with the video and all that stuff. And I told the handler, he's like, okay, so this is video. You want to do some video? And I just looked at him and I was like, no. He's like, you sure? I was like, yeah. No, the photo is one thing, but like
Yeah.
video, I didn't want there to be anything other than me just being there as a fan. I didn't want there to be any of those same questions, like, do you have a cameo in chapter 2? Or, you know what I mean? I wanted to avoid that subject altogether because I think it was cool. If you know, you know. I saw it in my hometown here, not my hometown, but the town I live in which I
Yep.
reside. Um, I took my daughters to see it in IMAX, right? And this face is
Oh,
not ready for
nice.
IMAX, believe me. Um, I look like Darth Vader in Return of the Jedi when his helmet gets cut off, but that's a whole nother story. Um, yeah, so whatever. That's regret number 3, not getting fit before they put you on film. Whatever. Anyway, I went to go see it, and I thought it was super cool that there was
Yeah.
some applause. And I was like, wow, those people know their shit. Those people actually saw that. Like, it wasn't lost on people. And there were a lot of people that I've met since then who are like, "Oh, I didn't even know you were in it." And I was like, "Well, you must have blinked, or you weren't in that space. You
Yeah.
weren't in that space." So the fact that some people still remembered and thought that was cool was cool. Yeah. Great
Yeah.
experience.
That,
Felt nice to be
that's
back for a
awesome.
little while. Yeah.
Oh, I bet. I bet. I mean, it was how long were you up there? A week and a half?
Yeah. Mhm. I
Yeah.
only shot
That's
one day, but I was there for a while, and that
nice.
was exquisite. I love that town. Toronto's a beautiful city. Um, so,
Yeah.
I'm looking for any excuse to go back to Hollywood East. Hint, hint. If you're out there,
Uh, eh,
hit me up.
so I want to jump back to one more question as far as the original. John Ritter.
Mhm.
Obviously, it was shot in. He had his half, you had your half, in a sense. But I know after watching the documentary that y'all did spend some time together too on set. How was that?
A little bit. I mean, but it was great. When I went up the first time, I was up there for I think 48 hours, and then I had to go back. Mind you, this was after I told all my friends at school that I wasn't going to be back to finish that year, and I'll see you next year. Right? But because we're law-abiding people, I had
Yeah.
a week in between, so I still ended up having to go back to work. And they're like, "Oh, welcome back, Mister Big Shot!" Right? So
Yeah, it's like, what
what?
happened? What happened?
Uh,
Trust me,
yeah.
I
Did
I
you
see it now.
fired? Yeah, so, 8th grade's a bitch. So,
Yeah.
anyway, I go up there and, we go to the base camp where, they were shooting Annette out in front of Beverly's house. So, I think John was there too. So I did my wardrobe fittings there in the trailer. Then I got a haircut that Tommy Lee Wallace supervised because it was the haircut that he had when he was a kid. So he wanted to make sure that it was just right.
Yeah.
Which I thought was awesome. Like, nobody
I
ever
mean,
did that
look
before.
look at the hair. Look at the hair right there, man. Look
I mean,
at
how cool is that, right?
it.
Perfect.
Perfectly
See?
styled too.
It's this perfect wall.
Yep.
Man, I wish I had even that much hair left. I just took it off the top and put it on my face. Um, but anyway, it was cool. So I finished all that business, and then Tommy walks me over, and John Ritter's sitting there, and there's 2 directors' chairs on this porch, and there's John Ritter, and they're like, "Hey, this is Brandon. Brandon's playing Ben. Ben, this is John Ritter." And I was like, "Yeah, I know. Believe me, I know who you are. I've seen you every day of my life on Channel 9 or Channel 11 in repeats." The guy was a god to me. Um, and I'll never forget. He goes, "So what kind of an actor are you, Brandon?" And I said, "What do you mean? I don't know what you mean. Can you rephrase the question, sir?" And he's like, "Well, how do you approach acting? When you read a script, do you read the whole script? Or are you a my line, bullshit, 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 my line, bullshit kind of guy?" Like, if that's not an icebreaker, I don't know what is. So
Yeah.
instantly I felt comfortable with him. I still wasn't sure what the right answer was. But I had a feeling it was read the whole script. So
Yeah.
instantly, we've met for 30 seconds and I've already been imparted with, a pretty substantial lesson in how to, do my job. Um, and we kind of joked about the fact that of all the kids in the lineup in the makeup trailer, um, we looked the least alike. It was sort of the least probable that we would be paired up. And he's like, "Your audition must have been really good, kid." And I was like, "Oh, if you only knew. I thought I lost it a million times." But he said, "So we need to work on
Uh,
getting something that we can do together, some business. Do you stutter? What do you do? What's your thing?" And I was like, "Well, I bite my nails." And he's like, "Okay, we're biting nails. We're gonna find something to do that ties us together because the rest of it isn't gonna do it." And that was kind of it. It was great. And we talked about, what he's working on, and I think Skin Deep,
yeah.
which is a freaking hilarious movie. Um, we talked about Don Knotts. So yeah, it was kind of cool. We would have some overlap time, and there was one time I was sitting on the grass with a couple of the other guys, and we were playing Tetris on the Game Boy, and he came swooping up like a high school bully, and he grabbed the Game Boy out of our hands. He's like, "What the hell is this?" And so yeah, we started playing Tetris. Totally not a fair trade, honestly, considering he gave me some pretty awesome acting pointers, and all I did was teach him Tetris. But it was super cool for him to want to hang out with us for a little while.
No, absolutely. And it had to be like just a super cool experience to know, to have this, I guess, amazing actor to come on set. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I loved how you talked about that. He said that he wanted to find a thing that you did, and it was the
Yeah.
biting of the fingernails. I feel like that those all are like little moments that you can kind of pick up on as far as like what great actors like look for to, be
Yeah.
better in their role.
Yeah, I mean, you have to find something that brings you together, and in that case, that we found our thing. I know Ben Heller was talking about how he met Richard Mazer, who was Stan, in his hotel,
Mhm.
which, dude, there's no doing that now, right? They call him a
Oh
groomer,
yeah.
um, or something. He'd be canceled. No, but it was,
True.
you know, bring a 15-year-old kid to meet you in a hotel, but they did the same thing and they settled on the ear pull. Um, I don't think Emily got a chance to work with Annette too much, but I mean, they were so believable as
Oh yeah.
in the same role that there's no question they didn't have to do anything. They were so much alike in so many ways. So, but yeah, and I know Richard Thomas got together with Jonathan, so we all had a chance to at least have some time with them, but we didn't like hit the town with them or anything,
Yeah, of
you
course.
know. But
Yeah.
I was so excited because John Ritter, like I said earlier, I grew up with him on my TV every single day. So in many ways, he was a hero. Like I was totally starstruck, because he's just that way. Um, but it was great. Totally great.
So I have one more question to to follow up as we lean off of it. But how many times have you seen the movie in full?
In full.
Since
Um,
yeah, in full.
right. Saw it at the premiere, which was really cool because, we shot it widescreen, shot it to film, um, which is great. You think about how it's survived and it can, do well on a
Mhm.
widescreen, display now. It's just a little foresight, I guess. Um, but it was really cool to see it in a theatrical setting, seeing it at the
Oh,
at the
yeah.
Directors Guild Theater where we had the premiere. It was so cool. And I got to meet Will Wheaton. Like it was so cool.
That's awesome.
I'm sure there were other people there as well, but like Will Wheaton, you know, stood out
Yeah.
for me because I was a huge Next Generation fan. And and I thought it was cool to get some kudos from him because he was in like a real movie, a real Stephen King movie, the way I saw it then. I've watched it a couple times, um, straight through. I can't really watch it knowing what I know now and not wanting to like pick my performance apart. I would
Yeah.
savage it. And I mean, I guess that's just kind of part of the game. That's why, you only get the one chance to get it right, or you get the one day to get it right. And I don't know. When you're doing theater, I'm not going to go like on this long diatribe, but when you're doing theater and you're doing 8 shows a week, over an extended period of time, you have time to find those extra gems, those extra moments, those jewels, those even, I mean, right down to line readings. You get this time to really workshop something. When you're doing TV and film, like, dude, you got to get it right. And so looking back,
Yeah.
you're like, why did I say it like that? Why did I do that? So I think because of that, I'm less inclined to watch it. My kids have seen parts of it. I don't even think they've watched it all the way through. In fact, it's funny when it plays on its own, like it plays on television, and my girls are like flipping through the channels. They'll watch out of curiosity, but then they'll go back to what they were watching before. Like, and I think that's great. I mean, they're not in
Yeah.
any way defined by what I did years ago, except when I did the cameo in chapter 2, my daughter enjoyed a little bit of clout at school.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, I
Right?
bet. My dad was in the movie.
Yeah,
Big
but
movie
other
too.
than that, like there's no real, like I wouldn't push them to watch it. I mean, if they want to watch it, it's cool. They're not defined by me in that sense at all. So I think that's great. And just to answer your question, yeah, no, I probably won't watch it too much.
Yeah.
Just because I'll be like, why did I do that?
No, I don't understand. I think a lot of people do that in really just whatever their perspective field is, or anything that they love to do. Like I'll be
Right.
honest with you, I don't go back and listen to any of my podcasts. The most that I
Right.
listen to is what I have to edit, and I just
Right.
let it out there because it's like, oh,
That's
why did
good.
I word it that way, or why did I say that? I just let it be. I just let it
It's
be.
better. It's natural. It's good.
So, this year, it kind of resurfaced as far as the documentary that came out, Pennywise: The
Right.
Story of It. I had John on the show a few episodes ago, and it was an absolutely
Nice.
phenomenal conversation. And I just learned so much between talking to him and diving into this 2.5 hour documentary.
Yeah.
How excited were you to kind of jump back into this world and talk about this film? And I think one of the reasons why I asked this is because I asked John on the podcast, what was one of the most rewarding things as far as making this documentary, and he says there's many things that you could pull from, but he specifically brought up the reconnection between you and Ben Heller. He said y'all have
Oh, yeah.
kind of kept touch over the years,
Yeah.
but that was like one of your first reunions. So can you kind of talk about that and what that experience was like, and just the documentary
Yeah.
in whole?
No, it was great because we did, we shot that in July of 2017, right? So it's just out now, and it's sort of a testament to, how much stuff they had to go through, honestly, to put this
Yeah.
together. I'd seen Ben before, maybe 10 years before. He came, he was in LA, and we met up for drinks one time, and we kind of had a little mini reunion, and that was great. Went our separate ways. But to see him again, face to face, was great. And I think what's really special for me about the doc, you know, apart from just getting to sort of tell my side of the story, three things. Number one, I learned so much from that documentary, and I was there, man. Like, I
Yeah.
learned things I never knew and probably never would have thought to think about. I mean, it was so educational for me. Um, because you're just there to do a job. We have no idea that Bob Iger was the one who, greenlit this movie for ABC TV. I mean, there's just these things that are so awesome to learn. There was that. There was there was seeing Ben, but I think moreover the production manager for that documentary, his name is Mike Perez, and he's also an appearance agent. So as we were signing our contracts for this, he brought up the fact that he represents people for personal appearances, and he books people into Comic Cons, horror cons. And apart from like Star Trek conventions that I'd heard about, I had no idea that there was this whole other world of conventions and or a community really based around horror. So
Yeah.
it opened my eyes up to that whole thing, and that was a catalyst to let the rest of us connect, which has been amazing. I mean, the first time I saw Marlon was the following February. We both went to Days of the Dead in Atlanta, and they also had Jeremy Ray Taylor and Chosen Jacobs.
Oh,
You know,
nice.
so yeah, so we had two Bens and two mics, and it was so cool to get to meet them as well. But when I saw Marlon in the hotel, and it was just like we just finished shooting, last week. We
Yeah.
connected right away, and it had been like 27 years. I mean, half of our lifetimes, really. And it's been magical, and we've been to London and Germany, and it's been great to reconnect with these people. And it's great when we do things like panels and someone will ask us a question and one of us will field it and it will bring back another flood of memories. It's great. I mean, it's been so great, and I owe that I think entirely to the documentary putting us together, and John, really.
Yeah, it's so awesome, and I'm glad you brought that up because I obviously have learned so much too just in that documentary, and it was just one of those things I could not take my eyes off of, and 2.5 hours just flew by. There's so much information, great information. Like just from the beginning is as hard as it was to even get on TV and what they were struggling with to get it on TV, and when they got it on TV to keep it on TV, and you can't do
Right,
this and you can't do that.
right, right.
Like the loops that they had to go through just to keep it on air and get it on air. I mean, it was so
It's like it's
crazy.
it's like telling ABC, "Dude, you realize you've just greenlit a Stephen King book, right?
Yeah.
That puts kids in danger by a murderous, alien, um, dressed up as a clown that eats children." Like, you realize you greenlit that shit, right? So let's
Yeah,
let's go for it. Let's go for it. And you know what? By and large, they really did. I mean, there are things
they did. Yeah.
um, that that sort of set the tone for the next thing, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the convention. Because I wanted to ask you about that. So that I'm assuming, like you said, based off of your comment, you just started recently going to conventions based off the documentary, correct?
Well, we started doing them before. We did them,
Okay.
we started in 2018. So, like, we shot the doc in 2017, and
Oh,
that
okay.
just shows you
Gotcha.
how much stuff they had to get through, honestly.
Yeah.
Bart Nixon gave them, like, 5 or 6 hours of videotape. Um, they did interviews with just about everybody that had anything to do with this movie. They even got, background players. They got everyone. So to get all of this information and somehow turn it into a 2.5 hour story to tell is amazing, right? I mean, um, I think it's an incredible feat. So yeah, we started doing conventions. Yeah, we don't do too many, like 2, 3, 4 a year.
Hmm.
Um, and then obviously COVID happened, so
Yeah.
we stopped doing them altogether until until the beginning of October. We went to Maine again. But other than that, I mean, we hadn't done them since 2019. So, it's great.
Hmm.
And we're looking at doing some shows next year. Um, so yeah, I mean, these are my favorite people to play with. So,
Yeah.
um, our bags are packed already.
As it should be because they're so fun. I was kind of late to the whole convention and going to conventions. Um, my first one was it was a Monster Con, and I was like you, I didn't even know they existed.
No.
I think Nev Campbell posted something on her Instagram. I'm like, Horror Con, like what is that? So I
Yeah.
clicked into it. I'm like, just saw so many people from movies that I absolutely loved and adored, growing up, and I'm like, no
Yeah.
way. And I
Yeah.
went to it, spent the weekend there, and it was the best time I've ever had in my life. It's so fun seeing how people are dedicated to it and the
Yeah. No,
tattoos that people have.
there's like-minded people. By and large, it is a really supportive community. And there are so many artists, so many people that do fan art, that
Mhm.
make things, makers. I mean, people that are inspired by horror movies and they have an avenue, they have an outlet for their creativity. And I think it's amazing. And to see how well they prop each other up for the most part. Um,
Yeah.
Actually, there was a convention I went to in June? July. Yeah, July. It was in Kentucky, and it was called, Haunters Against Hate, which,
Mhm.
supports all kinds of LGBTQ, um, you know, groups, um, all over the country, um, and that was also pretty cool too. I mean, that was sort of born out of, some people in the horror community's response to the Orlando massacre.
Yeah.
Um so it's unfortunate that it's even necessary, but it's there. So, I mean, this community really is a big tent, you know, e everyone is welcome as long as you have that passion for the genre, and I'm marveled, like, at some of these creators every time I go to a show. In fact, between me and Marlon, no, I would say Marlon's the the biggest one. I mean, that dude needs to bring another suitcase with him because he just like, practically whatever he makes, he'll bring home in goods from people, which is cool. Yeah.
I love that so much.
It's hard
Brandon,
not to wanna support them because their hearts are just so big, you know?
no, absolutely. And again, for you, I'm sure it's just an absolute blast, not only being around, the people that you grew up on set with that movie, but also, again, just interacting with the fans and seeing the appreciation that fans still have so many years later.
Yeah, for me, that's the best part, and it's really heartwarming to hear stories, from people who weren't even born when this thing came out, people who
Me?
are as old as my kids, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
that are fans too, and to hear stories from them about how, your character resonates with them or help them through a troubled, part of their life is absurd in a way,
Yeah.
um, just because it's not at all what we expected. It was made for TV. We thought it would, if we got lucky, it'd be in Blockbuster, on a dusty shelf somewhere because that just wasn't the trajectory for TV movies. And the fact
Yeah.
that it became a cult classic is like beyond our wildest expectations. So in that sense, it's absurd. But to hear that connection that these people have with something you did so long ago, um, is incredible. It really is incredible, and it's humbling, and as it is surprising.
Well, it took me years after first seeing the movie that I even found out it was on TV because my
Yes.
uncle owned it on VHS. And I just, from the jump, I thought it was a movie. And I remember watching the movie and, that first part ended as far as the kids go.
Right.
And I was like, okay, so that went off. And and then the second half started. I'm like, oh, this is weird. And then, I'm like, man, this is so phenomenal though. But for the longest time, I thought it was just a VHS movie.
That's awesome. There's a guy on Twitter, a couple weeks ago who had this revelation. Um, he thought it was literally just the first part, and he was watching it on TV, and he woke up. Yeah, he fell asleep, and he woke up to, like, the second half, somewhere in the middle of the second half, and he's like, "I never saw this part before." And he's like, I just now realized after 20 years that this was a 4-hour movie." I thought that was
Yeah.
hilarious. hilarious.
that is absolutely hilarious because they do have if you're watching it on VHS, they have those end credits.
Right,
So it does
right.
make it seem like the movie's
It's
over.
it's over, and that's also, a testament to that first half too. I mean, it really begins and ends like a movie all by itself. Um, if you discount any finale from, the adults, like, why the fuck were they there? But
Yeah.
yeah, so it's just funny to me that some people are discovering there's a second half to this movie after all these
So
years.
so I know we talked about how busy we both been the past couple of days. So I don't know how much you've been on social media, but have you happened to see the HBO Max Welcome to Derry series prequel that was
I
announced?
have, I have. I'm
So I
following
know
that
they
series.
announced it. Yeah.
Yeah, they announced that some time ago.
Mhm.
It's kind of cryptic and cool, with a bunch of balloons in their office.
In the
And
office. Yeah.
I saw today that I mean, I already knew this that the showrunners, Jason would be one of the showrunners.
Mhm.
Um, as far as I know, I think Andy and Barb are connected to this too.
Yeah.
So, as they get closer to production, I'm pretty sure I'll be reaching out to those guys to get whatever tidbits I can get of
As you
information.
should.
'Cause I think it would really be a cool origin story. You watch chapter 2 and you see this sort of cutaway when they talk about where he came from, and
Mhm.
there's this beautiful wide shot of this unspoilt land with this smoky fireball, raining
Yeah.
down from the heavens. They could start this prequel series with that and have total continuity. It would be the perfect beginning, and it would be really cool to see a long format
Mhm.
series deal with that moment, clear up to when the losers take matters into their own hands as kids. There's a
Yeah,
lot. There's a
I'm
lot to
so
explore.
excited.
I know. There are some haters out there that are like, "No, it shouldn't be done." But I mean, this is it. We're not remaking something, and I don't think it would be um
W
it's not gonna be one of those reimaginings that disconnects it from the source. That's
Yeah.
never gonna happen.
Yeah.
It's not, and I'm sure it will set up in the same universe as the 2017 movie, um, and that's fine. Totally fine. Um, I'm excited for it. Like, I wanna get all the
Yeah.
inside dirt as it happens. If,
Yeah, and then to your point, you're not always gonna make everybody happy. Like, you're not, if you say you're gonna do a remake, people are pissed about that. If you're gonna do a prequel, people are pissed. You're gonna have people pissed about that. Or if you're gonna do
yeah.
something totally new, people are gonna be mad either way. So you got to go with, the creators, what your gut is telling you. And I think that
Yeah.
they're gonna have they have a really good thing going here. Super
And I
excited
think
for them.
yeah, and I think by and large, there are people in the beginning who are sort of they have a predilection to hate something that's different. There
Yeah.
were a lot of people who are super fans of the miniseries that were really pissed about them revisiting this movie. Um, but I know firsthand there are quite a few of them, and probably more of them um, than not, who are happy with them both and realize that
Oh
they both
yeah.
can coexist. It was just great. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. And as I told you earlier in the podcast, I was a little nervous. You're touching one of my favorite classics, and we've seen where that doesn't always work out, but they did a tremendous job.
they
And
did.
when you can have all of them coexist, both worlds coexist, that's phenomenal.
Yeah.
That's what you want. You
Yeah.
want it to
I
be
mean,
successful.
the only thing I was worried about was being just over 40 and being classic, right? Like this cult movie that has entered pop culture and is a big deal from 27 years ago is now just going to go up on a shelf to collect dust, and that isn't the case, you know. Um,
It's
if
not. It's
anything,
not.
it brought more awareness to the miniseries, and and for that I will always be thankful. because I'm totally proud of it. After all these years, I will sit and talk about it because I'm proud of it.
Well, I'm glad you took the time out of your day to talk to me about it because
Oh no.
I could sit here and talk hours about it, and that's what I've grown to like. I really appreciate when like when with yourself when you sit down and you talk about something that happened, because I feel like there's some actors that like only get remembered. I don't want to say only get remembered for something, but I feel like no matter what interview they do, even though they've done project after that, people always want to go back to that first project. And I've always wondered, does that kind of annoy some actors? Does it not? I mean, do they kind of want to move on? I feel like everybody may be a little different, but for you, it seems
Yeah,
like you embrace this.
yeah, of course, of course. I mean, I'm not out there trying to do that work anymore, right? So I'm not afraid of people thinking of this as the thing they remember me the most for. It's
Yeah.
totally cool. Um, I don't feel like my brand is being damaged, or I'm going to be pigeonholed or typecast. Right? I mean, I'm not looking to do this anymore. Um, but even still, like if you can work on something and 30 years later be proud of it, then you did a good job. Um, and it's just like, I don't know, some other profession where you kick ass at something, where you make a
Mhm.
mark somewhere, and people still remember you for that. That it can't be a bad thing. You I mean, unless unless they're pointing out that you sucked in something, in which case that would be bad, right?
True.
But
Would be.
it would be bad. But I know people have a tendency to want to be remembered for what's new, but
Yeah.
um, if you look at it from this aspect, right? Think of it as a stepping stone too. If we're revisiting an old title that you think that person wants to be, distanced from, um, what purpose does that serve? Because that was a catalyst to get you where you are now, right? You should
Yeah.
be thankful that people are remembering an old performance. Um, I don't know. I guess there's something to work out. I know everyone is different, but
Yeah.
for me personally, I'm proud of it. I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the Wonder Years. I'm proud of all the shit I did.
Yeah.
Um, it's great. I wouldn't be who I am if I hadn't. So I'm thankful, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and you should be proud of it. It's you should be proud of everything that you've been a part of. I remember watching the Wonder Years with my grandmother. It was the times that I really enjoyed. So that in itself brings back so many memories, and hopefully
Yeah,
we can talk about that on a future podcast because
yeah, absolutely.
that just brings back so many memories for me as well. Such a great show, and then to be involved with Stephen King's It. I mean, and to do such a great job, you should absolutely be proud
Thank
of it.
you.
It's phenomenal. And Brandon, I appreciate you taking the time out to talk to me today. I know there's been technical issues and everything, and you've
Yeah,
definitely
but
been
but we've
super
overcome
gracious.
them. We've
We
overcome.
have, and that's what you got to do. So before we wrap up and before I get you out of here, is there anything that you got going on? I know you have your amazing podcast. Can you tease anybody, any guest wise that you have coming on? Anything?
Uh, no, I can't tease right now, um, but it's okay. I am gonna do a couple of episodes. It's the Errorist Podcast, and not unlike this one, you can get it everywhere you get your podcasts. Um, but it's yeah, I mean, I'm actually gonna do a couple of episodes. The next couple of episodes that are coming are actually gonna be sort of wins, celebrating wins of some people that I grew up with, who are out there
I love that.
making things now, like Dustin Sighthammer, who um, is in like the Star Wars universe now. He was just in Obi-Wan Kenobi, and he's someone that I did theater with 15, 16
Mhm.
years ago.
Oh
And
wow.
after a lot of and like he did X-Men too. Like after all of these, like putting the work in, right, and grinding it out for years and years, like David Howard Thornton did in New York City. The perseverance pays off. And so I'm going to take the time and do a couple of episodes with these people, who've left a mark on me as I was coming up, and celebrating their wins right now, which is going to be great. And then we'll get back to horror. But yeah, it's the Errorist Podcast, and yeah, it's a labor of love. Thank you for calling it amazing. I appreciate it.
It is. It's a great listen. I look forward to every episode that drops. I'm subscribed, and if anybody listening to this podcast is not subscribed to the Errorist Podcast, make sure you go and subscribe. It's great content. Brandon, again, appreciate you coming on the podcast. It meant a lot to me, and it was a bucket list item to be able to talk to you today.
Right on. No, my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. That's going to wrap up the Take One Podcast, episode 29, and I'll see you